Hey folks, welcome back again. So in the last few lectures, we saw a lot of concepts right from connecting to different data sources, joining them on need, cleaning up data, and ultimately creating tabular and graphical reports. We saw a little bit on filtering and calculations as well. I would like to show you more on that in a little bit or in the coming lectures. So let's take a detour here and talk a little bit about maps. When you think about maps, the pictures that may come to your mind could be a world map or a map of the United States or a map of any other country, right? So what we're going to see is, can we plot some data in a map, right? For example, can we show the population numbers by states in a map, right? So the goal is to explore Tableau visualization using Tableau Maps. So what would we exactly look at in this particular lecture? Right, so we'll look at things like latitudes, longitudes, geospatial data, plotting a few things, how to play around with maps, and so on and so forth. So essentially, how is this information about maps stored? We talk about maps a lot, but there should be some way of storing this information, right? So we can actually store using something called latitudes and longitudes. And if you're not familiar with latitudes and longitudes, I have provided a link in the description. Or we can actually use a combination of country, state, city, postal code, etc. to kind of pinpoint the exact location of the part of world that we're talking about. Now, just as an optional FYI, I would say, is SQL Server has a data type called geospatial or geography data type. Now, this is a very interesting concept, and I have covered that in depth in my advanced databases course as well. But I have also provided a link of what is exactly geospatial data in the description. All right, so we know that what we are going to do over here, we know how map information might be stored. Let's look at some sample data and let's try to plot a few things in Tableau, right? So what I have done is I have taken some few rows from our AdventureWorks database and I have just put this into a table, right? And this is nothing but country, state, and city. But I have just punched in some random values and called it as profit, right? So we will keep this very, very simple. And this is how it's going to kind of look like. So what we'll do is, we will take this data and import it into Tableau and see what we can do with it. So I'll fire up Tableau and I'll say that I want to connect to my Excel book. And I call this as latitude, longitude. And here is some sample data, right? And just keep in mind that this doesn't have latitudes and longitudes, right? But let's see what happens when we create some reports out of this. So I'm going to create a new sheet. And on the left-hand pane, when you see dimensions, you see that the data type of this has been auto-recognized as geography. And if it doesn't, all you have to do is right-click and then just change the geographic role to one of these, right? So that's how it is. And then one of the other cool things which you must have seen by now is this latitudes and longitudes, right? If you remember, in our data, we never had these columns. So Tableau basically maintains an internal table which can look at combination of country, state, city, and some other things, and kind of intelligently recognize what is the latitude and what is the longitude of the point that we are talking about, right? So let's look at how those things work. When I actually double click on country, it'll open up a map, and it has kind of plotted these points. And if I just hold the shift button, I can move this map, right? And I can actually zoom in, zoom out, or use my mouse scroll bar and zoom in and zoom out. This is pretty cool. So I'm just using my scroll wheel, if I may call it that way, of my mouse, and then looking at each of these countries and looking at a few features of that. So this is some basic data out here, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on state, and now it has added an extra data point here. Within a country, it is also highlighting the states now, right? Similarly, I can do that for city as well, right? So it is highlighting the cities. So here what we have done is we have just taken some country, state and city information and then plotted that on a map. So Tableau was smart enough to recognize when I'm talking about country, USA, state, Washington, and city, say Redmond, where should I plot that particular point? So Tableau knows that stuff. It has its internal database, something, but it knows where to plot that. So it's actually that simple. And then you can do the formatting as you do normally in your normal graphical and tabular reports. Like for example, you can say, maybe the city, put it in the labels, and it'll actually label the cities. So if I just zoom in and wait for some time, it'll start appearing, right? And again, the customization is exactly as we have discussed before. So we have a lot of stuff in Washington. So let me zoom in a little bit more, and you see these points which is plotted. And again, I can actually drag and drop the profit in the label, and it'll also show me the profits as well. All right, so some cool stuff here. The next thing I wanted to show you, if you go to the map menu and then just click on map layers, you get some additional options here. Where you can kind of say what style you want. Do you want a light style, normal style, and a bunch of other options. Like if you want to see the streets and highways, you can do that as well. Some cool stuff here that you can play around with. The next thing I wanted to show you is you see this 147 unknown. And if you click on that, it'll actually open up a small mapping table, right? So these are actually the locations that Tableau couldn't find it in its database, and hence it was not able to plot it, right? So you can actually solve it in two ways. One of the ways is actually selecting a matching location so that Tableau knows what this location could be. And the reason why you might get this unknown is maybe you have misspelled some city name or something, and hence it's not finding a one-to-one match. So you can use this mapping to kind of solve those discrepancies. Right now, one of the things is if you kind of observe, you actually provided the city, state, and country and or postal code, and Tableau just looked it up into its database and plotted it into the map, right? So when you have these things in your data, Tableau is able to auto generate your latitudes and longitudes and all the good stuff, and basically it's able to pinpoint it on the map. But now imagine a scenario where you need to plot multiple points in the same city, right? So by what I mean by that is, for example, Microsoft's headquarters is located in Redmond, right? Redmond is a city in Washington state. And Microsoft has many buildings, right? So in Redmond, it has, they call it building 22, building 35, building 36, and all are located next to each other. Now, if I look at their state, city, country, postal code, pretty much everything will be the same, right? So all of them are, since next to each other, they all will be belonging to the same state, Washington, same city, Redmond. Thus, if you plot that in a map, you'll just get 1 point on the map because all the 3 points are sharing the same value. So how do you get around with this problem, right? So you need to distinctly show each building in the map. So how do you really get around with this? So Tableau has something called as custom geocoding, but I'm going to park that a little bit, and I'm going to show you something more simpler, which I have personally used in my projects. And don't worry, we'll briefly visit custom geocoding, and I'll put some links as well in the description. But let me kind of show you a few more things. So if I open up that Excel sheet which I just showed you, and then let me go ahead and just create a tab, and I'll call this as custom. And what I'm going to do is, before I actually go further, I wanted to show you this cool website. And this is called as latlong.net. And what it does is, if you just type in an address like building 33, it will actually show you the latitudes and longitudes of that. So this sometimes pretty useful when you want to find the latitude and longitude of a particular a location. So I would suggest play around with that, and again I'll put this link in the description as well. So what I'm going to do over here is let me just go ahead and make some sample data. So we talked about the Microsoft building, so let's just run with that, right? So let me just create a column called Microsoft building number, and then I'll say latitudes and then longitude, and then just to make sure I conform with all the database rules, I'll create an ID, and I'll just create 4 rows in this. Just give it some random ID, and I'm going to call this as building 22. Let's call this building 22, building whatever 35, and by the way, these are all actual buildings. They do number it this way. So building 36 or 37, right? So I have this information, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in the latitudes and longitudes of this, right? So I'm going to use my website, which I just showed you. So if I type in building 22, it will give me the latitudes and longitudes. So I'll just kind of use that information. Now let me just briefly pause this video so that you don't have to watch me search these values and type it in. Alright, so I have typed in a couple of values, and if you see, I have typed in these building numbers and the corresponding latitudes and longitudes. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just import that sheet into our Tableau workbook. So I'll create a new data source, and just to keep it a little simple. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh this, and I'm going to actually use this one, the custom, right? So it has this information, and I'll create a new sheet. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to double click on the latitudes and longitudes, and it's kind of going to plot this, right? And right now it is showing me one particular point over here, and let me go ahead and add a couple of more things. So if I keep zooming in, it'll show me those 4 points that I just added. And let me just go ahead and switch on streets and highways as well, so that you can kind of see a better picture of what I'm talking about. And just so that we are able to recognize what each points are, I'm going to label this. So this is building 35, 36, 37, all are just nearby, just as I said, right? So some pretty cool stuff. So this is a way in which, if you see, all these 4 points have the same city, state, and country and postal code and all. So naturally, if you use the typical way of letting Tableau auto generate the latitudes and longitudes, all the 4 points will basically be the same point, right? So that's where we introduced our custom latitudes and longitudes. All right, so yeah, one more thing which I promise I'll mention is custom geocoding, right? Custom geocoding is a way to extend the existing functionality of Tableau Maps to include some custom locations. It's just like the one that we discussed, and I'm going to show you a link over here. And so this is basically the Tableau helpline, help documentation, and I'll put this link in the description as well. What it does is, Tableau allows you to kind of create a CSV file, and when you create the CSV file, you need to take care of certain things. First of all, you need to make sure that the format, the column names, the column casing, everything matches. Even if there is a spelling error, Tableau will not recognize it. So there are basically formats and ways in which you can prepare this CSV file to kind of add an existing functionality, extend an existing functionality, or add a new functionality altogether, right? So they call it as adding new roles. Like, for example, creator name would not be in their database, but they will have state, country in their database. So you can kind of add an additional attribute so that these creator names could be mapped. Now it's a different way of what I showed you, but you can kind of create this CSV file, And then once you have the CSV file, what you could do is you could go and kind of import that CSV file by saying import custom geocoding, and it'll kind of plot that points that you added in the CSV file. Now, just an FYI, I do not personally use this a lot. I'd rather prefer that, I have the latitudes and longitudes stored somewhere, like a database or somewhere, and I just plot the points like the ones that I just showed you for Microsoft buildings, right? So that's great. So now you know how to handle maps. Now there are a few other advanced concepts like polygon mapping and so on and so forth, which I suggest you if you're interested, you should definitely read that. I personally don't use them that much, but it's kind of good to know what exists out there. So I hope that you have a good understanding of how the basic maps work, how you can plot some points, how you can kind of gather this information around. Now we'll meet in the next lecture with some more advanced concepts and topics. So see you next time.